President-elect Donald Trump continues to roll out his list of cabinet nominees, and as House Speaker Mike Johnson said over the weekend, he made picks, quote, who will shake up the status quo, end quote. Well, on the latest edition of This Week on the Hill, my weekend program with Speaker Johnson, I was joined by Real Clear Politics White House correspondent Philip Wegmann to get a snapshot of some of the status quo shaking selections. And here's that discussion. All right, let's start with this. A 30,000-foot view of the nominations thus far. What does this tell us about a second Trump administration?
What this tells us is that it's Donald Trump's transition and no one else's. For a little while there, it seemed that the incoming president was playing it kind of safe. There was a bit of bipartisan consensus behind a pick, like, say, Florida Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. That's someone who is certainly well qualified for that position, but also a shoe in the door. And then came some of these more unconventional picks. Pete Hegseth for Department of Defense Secretary, Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, and then most recently, Florida Representative Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. What that tells you is that it is Donald Trump fundamentally who is making these decisions, and him alone. It's not an advisor. It's not any outside group. It's him. He's the one who won 320 electoral votes. I was told by a former senior White House official who's in close contact with the transition, and he's the one making these decisions.
It clearly looks like Donald Trump. It's much different. You see the connections with TV. He's fixated on television news. Pete Hegseth fills that block. And you see, those who have been successful in business also are coming into his administration. Of course, it appears that Elon Musk is at his right hand most of the time. I want to go back as we talk about nominations and the process as it unfolds. I want to get your read on something that took place this week with the Senate electing or selecting their leaders for the next Congress or the next session. And the president didn't weigh in. The president-elect did not weigh in, but a lot of his supporters did, including Elon Musk and some other, a strong social media presence. And they wanted to elevate Rick Scott to the top. And it appears, my read on this is that the Senate leadership really is sending a message that they're not going to be swayed by outside pressure and moving John Thune up from the number 2 position to the number 1 position.
I think your read on this is correct. I think another takeaway here is that Twitter is not real life. You had folks like Elon Musk that you just mentioned, Tucker Carlson and others who are really trying to exert pressure on the rank and file of the Senate GOP conference. But that's a secret ballot. It's also a term that's going to last for some time, and these members are, obviously insulated from some of the populism that's swaying not just the House of Representatives but also the White House. These guys are up for election every 6 years, not every 2 or 4. And so while I think that what we saw from, Senator Rick Scott was a pretty valiant effort, regardless of whether or not you like his politics, it was an interesting challenge to follow. He just didn't have the votes. The reason why I think that we should still put a pin in this and watch closely is that there's sort of a bubbling frustration among the right flank, previously McConnell's right flank, now Thune's right flank, with how things are going. And certainly in Washington, D.C. right now, Republicans are of the opinion that Donald Trump has a mandate after winning the Electoral College and also the popular vote. And so the question is, when someone like Speaker Mike Johnson has shown that he is ready to move the ball down the field, are Senate Republicans also going to be team players here, not for, the establishment, but for the base that wants to see, big policies actually delivered, not just, changes at the margin?
But by design, the Senate was created to kind of be the kind of some speed bumps there, kind of slowing the process down to reach consensus. And we're going to see that when the confirmations begin. The Republicans, we still got a seat that's outstanding, so we don't know what the total count will be, but the Republicans have the majority in the Senate. So let's talk about some of these. I want you to handicap some of these because I know you're going to be tracking them. You mentioned Marco Rubio. I think that's a no-brainer. He's going in.
Yeah, your read on that is the same as mine. Rubio is someone who has done the homework when it comes to the China question, and of course we can get into this later. But he's well liked by both Republicans and Democrats because he's seen as not necessarily overtly political when it comes to the foreign affairs question. When it comes to defense, this is someone who keeps their nose in a book and is trying to find consensus on a common problem. Certainly he's well respected not just by Republicans but also Democrats.
Lee Zeldin, administrator of the EPA, that's another one that I think is going to sail through.
Yeah, I think Zeldin in all likelihood won't have much trouble. That said, I mean, you're sending Zeldin to the EPA. He's not thought of as a big environmental guy. He's a lawyer. Obviously, this is a pick that the incoming president would like someone to, slash red tape. That there could be some trouble there, but I don't see any Republicans abandoning ship. I think you're correct.
Governor Kristi Noem as the Secretary of Homeland Security. That's going to be a big department. I mean, it is a big department, but with the border issue being overseen by Homeland Security, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, Kristi Noem, she had a bit of a fall from grace, certainly, when her book came out because of the revelations about some family pets. I'm not certain that we're going to see Republicans abandon ship here. DHS, while it is a vast and sprawling agency, I think that she is seen sort of as a key piece here who's going to complement Tom Homan, the border czar, and then Stephen Miller, who's deputy chief of staff for policy in the incoming administration. I think that this is one to watch, but in all likelihood, she gets through.
One coming out at the end of the week, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to head up the Health and Human Services Department, one of the largest federal agencies.
You want to talk about a realignment, and I'd be more curious about your thoughts on this one because RFK Jr., he represents so much of what is new from Donald Trump because of Trump's ability to reach out to independent voters who are, perhaps homeless among the two-party system. But let's not forget RFK Jr. Yes, he's a Catholic individual, but he also supports abortion rights. Yes, he's very skeptical of pharmaceutical companies, but he's also, anti-big bank, anti-big business. He's an environmentalist. This is one of these guys who sort of breaks the mold. And Democrats, I don't think many of them are going to lend their support to RFK Jr. at HHS. I'm curious to see if there will be many Republican defections. But look, trust in science and institutions is at an all-time low after COVID. Perhaps he sneaks through.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to give you my thoughts right now because I'm willing to sit down and talk with him. I have reservations, but there are many positive things that you just laid out there that I think are good and need to happen. But for me, the sanctity of human life and that moral fabric of our nation, that foundation is absolutely critical. And I'd have to have some assurances there. For now, put me in the skeptic column when it comes to RKF. All right, let's jump to one that really turned some heads this week. Actually, there were two that kind of turned heads. One almost had head spinning, and that would be the nomination or the selection of an Attorney General, Matt Gaetz. Talk about that.
So we broke the news that Representative Matt Gaetz was expected to resign. It wasn't much of a scoop, though, because 15 minutes later, you had Speaker Mike Johnson, who told his conference that Gaetz had resigned effective immediately. And the reason why this is interesting is if you talk to Gaetz's allies, they'll say that in preparation for this contentious confirmation battle, he's burning the ships like Cortez. This is someone who is going all in for President Trump. If you talk to folks who are a bit more cynical, the timing here is very curious. The House Ethics Committee was preparing to release a report concerning activity of Mr. Gaetz and a allegedly underage girl. And by leaving Congress, that effectively, stymies that effort. The committee generally does not release their reports if it involve someone who is no longer in Congress. And that was sort of the speculation that perhaps he was leaving early to avoid that accountability. I do want to note, though, that these allegations that the committee is investigating, they began with a DOJ investigation, and the Department of Justice, certainly didn't charge and did not convict Mr. Gates. And he's of the opinion that this is nothing more than a partisan witch hunt. So that's where things stand right now. And all of Washington, D.C. is curious to see if Gates actually makes it to the Senate for his confirmation hearing.
Yeah, I've had a few conversations on the Hill regarding this, and you're correct. The timing of that, no one, the general membership does not know, because it's only the committee members of the Ethics Committee that have seen the report and know the timing of its release, and they won't see it now because, as you pointed out, once a person leaves Congress, it's no longer under the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee, so it's for most purposes dead. However, there's some that I've talked to that feel that Democrats could leak it out. Those members of the committee could leak it out if the nomination advances. Now, there's some that have the theory that this was to kill this issue. He'll probably withdraw his name from Attorney General and run for governor in Florida, which is something he's wanted to do. And he can do that in 2 years without any baggage related to an ethics investigation.
Yeah, the theories abound, but I want to zero in on the first thing that you said about this report, because I think that your sources are very well informed. This report is not supposed to come out if Gates is no longer in Congress. There are some examples where information did follow the exit of a member of Congress, but those are exceedingly rare, and we'd have to go back to, I think, 1990 for the last example. But what I'm hearing is that this report is a grenade, and it is only a matter of time before it leaks and it explodes. Democrats have an incentive for this information to get out there, but they don't want it to go off right now. They want to wait until it's able to inflict maximum damage. Then there are some Republicans who would rather this information get out earlier, so the president-elect can either re-examine his choice, or perhaps Gates can bow out. And the second scenario, which you noted, perhaps a run for Florida governor, maybe that becomes the final scenario here. But one thing that I did find rather curious was that when the president-elect was at Mar-a-Lago talking to some of his supporters, he was shouting out each member of his incoming cabinet. No word, though, on the latest nomination that he had made, Representative Matt Gaetz.
Well, we know what the playbook of the left is. So we saw what they did in the Supreme Court nominations and how they dropped these things right there in the middle of a hearing. So that would be, a good indication or a good model to go by. All right, we got 30 seconds left. Not a lot of time to cover this, but Pete Hegseth.
Pete Hegseth, it makes the left go crazy, but this is someone who was in armed services for 20 years. He has won medals, and his nomination makes sense. If you look at his book, if you look at the Sean Ryan interview, this is someone who is absolutely on fire for reforming the Pentagon and going after sort of the woke excesses there. I think that's why Donald Trump picked him, and Hegseth will be prepared for that confirmation hearing. You don't get to be on TV every weekend if you're not quick on your feet. I think he's got a good shot.
All right. Philip, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you, sir.